Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first Tech Tuesday webinar of the new year. My name is Kevin Marheine, and I am the host of our Tech Tuesday webinar series here at Core Tech Services. As we mentioned, for those of you that tried to tune in live, sorry for the technical difficulties that we were having at the moment, but we're now going ahead and we're able to get Chris connected here. So we're going to go ahead and do this recording, and we'll get that sent out to everybody who registered for the webinar. In addition to sending you part 2 here, I will also include a link to part 1 of the Demystifying Microsoft Licensing in Azure webinar series that is hosted on our YouTube channel. So you're more than welcome to check out both part 1 and part 2 at your convenience. But without any further ado, Chris, thank you for joining us here today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to run through the presentation you've prepared.
All right, great, Kevin. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks everybody for coming and watching the recording here. And kind of got a lot to cover today. Real quick, if you don't know who I am, Chris Shalda. I work at Core Tech Services, and I am our Senior Solutions Architect for Cloud Solutions. So I do help a lot of our customers out in architecting solutions around Azure, as well as Microsoft 365. So I have a lot of opportunities to talk with a lot of our different customers and in their different situations, and just helping them to improve their architecture and also kind of optimize, and as well as just help them along their cloud journey as it would be. And today we're going to be kind of continuing on the whole demystifying licensing in Azure topic. There's a lot of good stuff in part 1. I would recommend you would check that one out either soon after this one or before this, because there are some things I'm going to be building upon. I do a little bit of a quick review here, just in case you hadn't seen part 1. What we're going to cover today is just that quick review, and then I'm going to get into, instead of just like kind of the what and the why, like I did in part 1, a little bit of the how. How do you actually apply these benefits in Azure and use your licensing for Windows Server, SQL Server, and Azure. And then we're going to get into some of the other licensing in Azure that we didn't cover last time, which is going to be Windows 10 and RDS, like remote desktop services. And then, yeah, we'll then kind of let you know how we can help you guys if you have anything that you need from us. So let's get started here. So similar like for part 1, I have a little disclaimer here, just saying that this is, whenever we talk about licensing, you know, there's contracts involved and terms and conditions. All this is meant for guidance. I'm not saying it's 100% perfect, but I did my research and try to make sure it's as perfect as possible. But in any case, you know, for official guidance, you talk to Microsoft account representative, LSP, or CSP provider for those details on licensing and compliance. Not all the scenarios we're going to cover today are going to be, or not everything we're covering today is not going to cover all the scenarios out there, like classic VMs or any special rules for national type clouds. Well, I'll only be demonstrating some of the Azure portal methods today, but there are other methods. Typically, whenever you can do something in Azure portal, you can do it in Azure CLI and or PowerShell. So just be aware that that's usually possible. You just have to check out the Microsoft docs for details there. And then, as always, you know, the official word is going to be the product terms documentation from Microsoft. So check that out for official guidance. So just to let you know, if you're not aware, all these videos actually from these webinars get recorded, and they are put on our YouTube channel. And so definitely check out our Tech Tuesday webinar series. I kind of showed you here. This is what our YouTube channel looks like. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when we have, you know, new videos that we do upload for future webinars too. So let's get into it. So a little bit of an overview from last time. Let's talk about Windows Server licensing in Azure. It's another little view here of what, you know, comprises of a Windows Server VM. There's the infrastructure cost, which is typically like the compute, like CPU and the RAM, you know, the storage. There's going to be some bandwidth charges typically. And then on top of that's going to be the Windows operating system cost. When you have the hybrid benefit, meaning like, say you already own licensing and you apply the Azure hybrid benefit, there's no additional cost for the Windows OS licensing. So you don't have to pay that as the kind of the pay-as-you-go cost there. But even if you don't have licensing today at all for Windows Server, if you were to purchase something like software subscriptions, like we mentioned in part 1, that's typically cost less than having to kind of rent the license, if you will, as pay-as-you-go. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about here, is assuming that you have or will be purchasing the Windows Server licensing, and I'll show you how to apply that in a bit. So another thing too, another recap of how that licensing kind of maps from what you own to what it works, how it works in Azure. So typically you buy Windows Server licensing in 16 core packs. And so each 16 core packs that you see, that example 1, 2, and 3, there's basically 3 things you can do with it. You can use that 16 core pack and apply it to a 16 core VM. You can apply it to 2 8-core VMs or 2 VMs that are, less than 8 cores, let's just say, or some sort of mix there. Bottom line is you have to apply minimum 8 cores per VM, and then you have to apply enough 8-core packs, if you will, to suffice for the number of vCores. So on the right side, showing that there's 32 vCores, you really need like 4 8-core packs or the 2 of the 16-core packs to cover that license-wise. So as long as you have enough licenses, right, then you apply this and you will be in licensing compliance if you do it this way. So a little quick overview on the SQL Server licensing in Azure. So a little different view here as well. This is kind of the same idea as in Windows servers, that you're going to have that base compute cost, the A as it refers to there. And if you're just going to do pay-as-you-go licensing for the SQL license, you're going to pay what it looks like, it's B on the left side there. Or if you're to pay SA, the software assurance or maybe software subscriptions, you're going to pay for C. So being that's a little bit less than B there, so it's a little bit more cost effective if you're running those VMs 24/7. And the SA there does refer to software assurance for licensing as well as software subscriptions, as they have the same type of benefit here. So as well with SQL workloads, another thing to make sure you keep in mind, and I've mentioned this before, is that there's enterprise, there's standard, right? There's the 2 main kind of types of licensing that you can use in Azure. For SQL, there is web as well. It doesn't really tie into PaaS services. You can use it on VMs if you have software assurance on that. It just is not as, let's say, not as, I don't even see, I guess, popular coming across very often. But those other ones, if like web, you'd have to have software assurance. You can use it on VMs. But for enterprise and standard, one enterprise core you can use that and actually break it up into 4 general purpose cores essentially on the PaaS side, which is essentially standard. But in general, you can take 4 standard cores and kind of merge them into an enterprise core as well when we're talking about the PaaS services with Azure SQL. So this is just an idea here, just that general purpose is going to generally be for standard licensing, business critical typically for enterprise licensing, but you can kind of convert some of those licenses, which is a kind of cool benefit that Microsoft offers if you already own the licensing. It's just a little bit flexible. So now we get into the how. All right, so how do we apply this, what's called Azure Hybrid Benefit, or AHB, in Azure for Windows Server VMs? So to start with, there's a few ways to use virtual machines in Azure with the AHB, and I'm going to refer to it as AHB. It is Azure Hybrid Benefit. And basically, you can start with a marketplace image. So downloading our marketplace image, deploy a VM from that. That might already have hybrid benefit built into it. It's also known as BYOL, you might see it as. You can upload a custom VM, so one that you've already built an image for, or something that you could, that you've built an image for either on-prem or in Azure that you're going to be pulling into Azure, basically. And you can also toggle and convert an existing VM with running with Azure Hybrid Benefit or pay-as-you-go on-demand cost. So you can kind of switch back and forth if you want to at any time. And you can also apply it to virtual machine sets. So what it looks like when you're creating a new VM in Azure and you're going through the process in the portal, you're going to get to basically it's the first page when you're creating the virtual machine, and towards the bottom it's going to have this little thing called licensing. So you'll see that on the left side here, and you're going to click the box if you have enough licenses to cover you for Azure Hybrid Benefit, and then you check the box saying I confirm I'm eligible. This is one of those things that Microsoft's, it's like accepting the end user license agreement on stuff, right? It's like, did you read it? Yes, I read it. Of course, review the Azure Hybrid Benefit compliance there. If you need a refresher, there's a link there. If you have a VM already today in Azure and it was a Windows Server, and you want to switch from pay-as-you-go to AHB, you can just go into the VM configuration, basically click the VM in the portal, and on the left side hit configuration, and it should come right up here to the Azure hybrid benefit like it shows on the right side, and you can kind of switch that toggle there. So it makes it very simple for Windows Server to switch back and forth if need be. Now, if you're taking a VM that's on-prem and migrating it to Azure, and you were using KMS, a key management server, previously to perform all the activations of Windows, then you would need to run this command inside the guest OS. So this like SL manager command. This will basically tell the VM, hey, don't use the KMS server anymore to track my licensing. I'm going to use basically the Windows kind of Azure activation service instead. So that's the way to do that if you had a VM that was on KMS and you moved it to Azure. All right, so moving on to how to apply SQL Server HB in Azure. So this is the same idea, but for SQL Server. And we're gonna look at it from SQL Server VM, as well as Azure SQL Database, which also kind of applies to Azure SQL Managed Instance. So to begin with, one kind of critical component here when we're talking about running SQL on a VM is this thing that it should be more well known, but I feel like it's not. Not a lot of people know about this. It's called the Azure SQL IaaS agent extension. So there are some benefits to this. This is just a typical VM extension from an Azure perspective, where it allows a lot of stuff to just kind of within the guest OS talk with Azure. It's kind of a bridge between Azure and the guest OS to perform management capabilities, do some tracking for you. So some of the benefits here would be, number of benefits. I feel like I might even do another webinar just on running SQL in Azure and all the different benefits that you get from doing that. But this unlocks things like automation features, such portal management, license flexibility, automated backup, automated patching, lots of more stuff there. So right away you get some huge feature benefits. Next, and this is what's salient to today's discussion here, topic, is that this extension, it offers a simplified method of fulfilling the requirement to notify Microsoft that the Azure hybrid benefit has been enabled for SQL Server, as is specified in the product terms. Basically, if you were to use Azure hybrid benefit for SQL Server, you either have to enable this IaaS extension so that there can be some reporting back to Microsoft about how many license cores that you guys have for SQL that you're running in Azure, or you have to fill out some paperwork through the licensing mobility kind of process, and that's kind of annoying. So I would say do it this way. It's so much easier to keep track of than having to deal with all the paperwork and keep that organized. Other thing is it's free. There's no cost associated with this. So of course, definitely do it. It's free. And then simplified license management, kind of tied to the compliance piece there. So it allows you to see like what version of an edition of SQL is installed on the VMs, and then you can then say, kind of run reports off of all that from an Azure perspective. It's huge. So highly recommend doing that. So I'm going to show you how to register that. So the first way is through automatic registration, and essentially you just go in, you click on SQL Virtual Machines, into the blade on the left side there in the Azure portal, and you're going to say automatic SQL VM registration. The prerequisite here is that you do have to have the contributor role. And when this is enabled, essentially a job runs daily to detect whether or not SQL Server is installed on all the unregistered VMs in the subscription. And this is done by copying the SQL IaaS agent extension binaries to the VM, then running a one-time utility that checks for the SQL Server registry hive. If the SQL Server hive is detected, the virtual machine is registered with the extension in lightweight mode. And if no SQL Server hive exists in the registry, the binaries are just removed. All right. And then once the automatic registration is enabled for a subscription, all current and future VMs that have SQL Server installed will be registered with the SQL IaaS agent extension in lightweight mode. You still need to manually upgrade to full manageability mode to take advantage of the full feature set though. So be aware of that. So essentially what you're going to do, sign into the Azure portal, navigate to SQL Virtual Machines resource page, select automatic SQL VM registration. And then what you're going to do after that point is choose a subscription or subscriptions from the dropdown, read through the terms. If you agree, hit accept, and then select register to enable this. So pretty straightforward. There are alternative methods that you can do this on a single VM basis or do a bulk VM registration, kind of like identify multiples at the same time. It's just as a one-time thing, but obviously automatic registration is going to do a lot of that legwork for you and ensure that you are kind of capturing all of that across your environment in case you might have in your process, hey, whenever, developer or engineer creates a VM on Azure that has SQL, you need to make sure you register it manually. But you know how things go when you kind of require a manual process to happen. There's opportunity for that to not happen. So the automatic registration is definitely recommended if that works for you. So the management modes, lightweight is the default mode. That's what automatic registration does for you. There is no restart required. The full management mode does require a restart, so be aware of that. Would still recommend investigating that and doing that and scheduling that properly to restart that. And then there's a no agent mode, which very limited capabilities there. That's just for SQL 2008 and 2008 R2 only. All right, so getting into the how. Now, if you have an existing SQL Server VM today and it's already on pay-as-you-go, and you're like, oh man, I want to use the Azure Hybrid benefit. I didn't know about that. I already have licenses, or I'm going to buy licenses for that. Then all you have to do is you just find that virtual machine under the SQL, Azure SQL there. You're going to hit configure, and it's going to know because you have the IaaS agent on it. I mean, that's the first step, right? The SQL IaaS agent. Then you can flip the switch here to say pay-as-you-go to Azure Hybrid benefit. HADR is that other benefit I mentioned in part one, where if you have software assurance, which you'd have to use Azure Hybrid benefit here, or software subscriptions, you don't have to pay for the licensing on the secondary node that's in HA or the third tertiary node, basically in DR in a different Azure region. For those secondary and third nodes, you would select HADR for those, so that you won't even need licensing for that. All right. And so for a new Azure SQL database, so this is going to be the kind of the PaaS side of things, right? This is what it looks like when you're creating a new one. You're going to see on the top there, you see like basic, standard, premium, and then vCore based purchasing options, which is highlighted. You have to select vCore based purchasing when you're using Azure Hybrid benefit for Azure PaaS. Azure SQL PaaS type services, because the standard and premium work off this like DTU model that it's just not compatible with Azure Hybrid benefit. So it has to be vCore. So we select that, and then the next screen should come up and show on the top there, general purpose of business critical, like I mentioned before. So you select the one that is the one you need, and then you'll see under save money, you say, okay, yes, I have a SQL Server license, and then again, click the, are you sure you have a server license, right? Click the checkbox there, and you're off and you're running. That will automatically then select the Azure Hybrid benefit for you. For an existing machine, it's like, wow, this looks exactly the same. It basically is exactly the same. You see on the left side there, you're going to click configure for your existing SQL database, Azure SQL database, and select those same options. So you can do that after the fact, you can do it at the time of creation. Either way, very flexible. So one other thing I want to kind of talk through was kind of the creation and management of Azure SQL resources is kind of related to this, and how this works with the IaaS extension. So essentially, you put an Azure SQL, and it's a little confusing. Azure SQL, when you just hear Azure SQL, that kind of refers to the management portal. And when you're talking more specifically Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL Managed Instance, that refers to those specific Azure resource types, the Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance. So just be aware that if you see just Azure SQL, it's most likely referring to kind of like overall management, which it is here. So when we select that, you just hit add right here, and that's where you can add your resources. Now, one reason why I want to show you this is the type of, you can see here what type of information that we get right away of, the name of the resource, what the resource type is, if there's a specific service tier for it, whether, it's a DTU type tier or it's a vCore type tier. There's a lot of information that you can get right from here around the additions and that type of thing. So a little bit for illustration, but once we add it, then you can, look at SQL virtual machines, hit show details in some of these different areas for more information. So just want to give you an idea that this was even available. It kind of ties into the overall capabilities around Azure SQL. One thing before we get going here is a couple of questions I think that come up a bit. So I did cover SQL Server, and typically this is, people have Windows Server with SQL Server, but you can actually install SQL Server on Linux. There's a little bit different process of activating the licensing, so make sure you check out the Microsoft docs for that. Just want to make sure you knew that hybrid benefits will work for running SQL on Linux. I know it's like cats and dogs living together, but it is a thing, and that is possible. I mentioned about the web edition on SQL. So you can use Azure Hybrid Benefit for that. You can do that via software assurance for bring your own license, but also know that you can also run a pay-as-you-go image of SQL Web Edition. There's first parties and third party kind of deployments through the marketplace for those. So just check out the Azure Marketplace for that. And the other thing too is that comes up is there any downtime when changing licensing models to AHB on either Windows Server VMs or SQL servers? There's not. That's also the beauty of this, is there is absolutely no downtime whatsoever when you're just activating the Azure Hybrid Benefit or moving it back to pay-as-you-go. So be aware of that. That means you should go just make sure that you're taking advantage of that as soon as possible if you have those licensing. So now we're going to get into the last bit, which is Windows 10 RDS licensing in Azure. All right, so RDS meaning remote desktop services. You might know it as like RDP or terminal services, same idea here. These are the other two kind of Microsoft type licensing that we have to talk about in Azure. So some quick notes. First, Windows 10 licensing, it cannot be used in Azure unless it's used in conjunction with WVD, which is Windows Virtual Desktop. Because of that, I'm going to actually give you a quick overview of what WVD is here shortly so that you know what that means, and maybe it's something you weren't aware of. It might be something to look into because it's actually a really cool service. Now, the only exception here is Azure Dev Test offers. Those are excluded, so you can actually use Windows clients there, like Windows 10, 8, 7 to do testing and development work. But you cannot just run Windows 10 or 8 or 7 or whatever in a normal Azure subscription unless it is specifically used with WVD. And that's part of licensing terms and everything. And if it is part of the WVD, the Windows 10 must be licensed as per user when used in Azure. You cannot use per device-based licensing. Again, more tied to WVD in terms of has to be assigned to the user. It can't be the traditional kind of assigned to a device type licensing for it to be in compliance. So RDS, right? So I'm talking specifically the remote desktop services, CALs or sales, so like client access licenses or they're like subscriber access licenses in the SPLA world. These CALs, so whenever you have something set up like terminal services, this is on a server OS, and you have more than 2 users that are going to be hitting it, right? Because you get the first 2 users for free. You have to have each of those users, and there's actually device licenses, but it's actually no, it's all user licenses. Each user has to have like a CAL, enough CALs for all those users. So those licenses, in order to use RDS in Azure, beyond those, again, beyond those first 2 that are just included in every Windows server, you have to have active software assurance or be licensed as a software subscription. You can get RDS CALs through software subscriptions or through SPLA. And SPLA usually just for service providers, but that is another option. Those are the only ways that you can basically license it to be used in Azure. All right, so now we got that out of the way. I want to talk through WVD because that actually is inclusive of some of these things here. So really quickly here, this is kind of the traditional way where you would have a virtual desktop, let's just say. On the left side, this is a server OS. This is what was known as terminal services forever. It's now remote desktop services. This allows you to have multi-session, multiple users logging in the same server. And there's some kind of restrictions around Office there, but that's been the way things have been forever. And on the other side has been, all right, Windows 10 Enterprise, it has been previous versions of Windows, right? But it used to be just a single session, meaning one user, one virtual desktop, which is very different from the left side where you can have multiple users on a single kind of OS. So you kind of had to choose between the two depending on what you wanted, and there wasn't, what if I wanted everything? If I wanted multi-session, I wanted to have all those things on the right side, Microsoft 365 enterprise apps, the UWP type apps. What if I wanted all that? Well, there wasn't an option until now. The option is WVD. This is the Windows Virtual Desktop multi-session. So it is Windows 10, so the per user Windows 10, and you can have multiple sessions on Windows 10. It's like, wow. I mean, that is something that has never happened before from a client OS, for Windows Client OS. So this is huge, and we're seeing a lot of this happening. A lot of customers taking advantage of this, especially with the whole COVID situation. And so this is a newer option, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But one thing to note is that you can use the remote desktop session hosts, and the thing on the right side shows Windows 10 Enterprise, like one-to-one on virtual desktops, as part of a WVD solution, right? Again, Windows 10, either two on the middle of the right, you have to do through WVD if you're doing it in Azure. You can't do it any other way. On the left side, you can do kind of out of band, let's just say remote desktop services without having to go through WVD. You can do that, just so you know. So what is this thing? This is the only way to deliver, basically the only multi-session Windows 10 experience out there. This does not work on-prem. So this is something that's kind of exclusive to Azure. It enables a lot of optimizations for Microsoft 365 enterprise apps, including, if you're familiar, maybe you may not have heard of it, FSLogix was a acquisition by Microsoft. They've actually acquired that and added that to some of the licensing that you might already have. Basically, all licensing I'm going to talk about in a minute of what enables you for this, in order to do some really awesome stuff with user profiles. It changes the game with user profiles, honestly. And you can migrate, Windows Server desktops and apps, so things that you already have today, you can migrate to this here, and the idea is it deploys and scales in minutes. But the biggest thing, key thing, is that usually when you're standing all this up, you have to deal with all of this stuff on your own on-prem. Standing up on that top box there, which says managed by Microsoft or partner, usually you have to have a whole bunch of servers in HA to even allow somebody to connect to one desktop, right? Lots of stuff that has to happen, but Microsoft's doing that all for you. It's basically as a service for you. So it reduces a tremendous amount of overhead, not only of the operational side, but you don't have to pay for it. There's no cost associated with those underlying components that are kind of there, that web access management, the diagnostics broker, gateway, all that stuff. You don't have to pay for any of that. That's just included. Like, as long as you're entitled, you have a license for it, that's kind of built in, which is awesome. So that's the main thing. It uses Azure Active Directory. You can use your existing Active Directory. There's a lot of different parts and pieces to this, lots of different ways that we can go about it. We're an expert in this area. We've helped a lot of customers with like tens of thousands of devices, I feel like, tens of thousands of users to get this set up since even the beginning of 2020. So we're one of the experts in this area. So if you want to know more, definitely let us know. We'd be happy to help. And so now it's like, okay, well, what licenses can I use then, right, to enable WVD? So here's the list. So for the Windows 10 side, whether it's single session or multi-session, it requires Microsoft 365 E3, E5, F3, there's Business Premium. You can get the Windows 10 specific SKUs. You see the E3, E5s, and also the education ones. And then Windows 10 VDA per user you can get if you like strictly want to just have only the desktop and you don't want anything else besides that kind of remote desktop. So yeah, that's kind of the high level there. You can even run Windows 7 still in Azure. You'll actually get extended security updates until January 2023 at this point, for if you have some legacy applications that just won't run on Windows 10 and you're still trying to figure out, I've got to upgrade it or we got to get something new in there, but we just can't yet. Move the Windows 7 remote desktop up to Azure, and you'll get those extended security updates. It's huge. And on the bottom there, again, kind of RDS CALs, you have to have software assurance, or it has to be a software subscription in order to take advantage of that, kind of the remote desktop services. Okay, so that's kind of everything there. Hopefully this was valuable. Definitely, if you have any questions or you want to talk through some of your architecture in Azure and ways that we could help, just feel free to reach out. I've got our email address down there, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn as well. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Great, thank you, Chris. Great presentation. And the next upcoming Tech Tuesday webinar that we do have in place is on the 26th of January. That is another Tuesday, of course. And that one is going to be focused on Azure migration strategies. That's going to be presenting that day. We're going to have our Azure practice director, Mr. Clint Adkins there. But we're also going to have a representative from Microsoft as well that will be speaking on that. So if you're interested in learning more about Cortex approach to migration strategies and what our sort of secret sauce is to making those successful, and then also hearing from Microsoft about them as well, feel free to join in. That is actually 2 Tuesdays from now, so 2 weeks from now. Again, just want to thank Chris for taking the time for walking us through this fantastic presentation. I know there was a lot of great details there. So as he mentioned, there's both the inquiry at cortec.com if you want to reach out with questions, or like you said, he's got his link to his LinkedIn page right there. So feel free to reach out to him there, and we'll make sure to include a copy of this presentation when we send out this recording here shortly. So thank you all for watching the recording, and we'll catch you during the next Tech Tuesday webinar series. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thanks.